we in our neoliberal modernist culture have been fed this diet of kind of, what you've seen, and we're given these examples of what we have to be like to be seen as beautiful. But when you go into a forest and you see a kind of perfect looking tree, you probably walk straight past it because it just looks quite boring. When you see an old, gnarly oak tree that is wizened, it had a branch knocked off in a storm, it was hit by lightning, it's got an owl nesting, it's got holes and crannies and scars, and it's a big, gnarly old tree. The older the better. That is the tree that we stop and we look at it and we say, that tree is so beautiful. And when you think about the elders in our community, people that have lived through real trauma and have found meaning, those are the people that we want to sit with at the feet of and say, tell me a story. They are the healers. So I think there's something around really allowing whatever we've been through to guide us and create the shape of our tree.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with me, Dan Burgess. We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. Like a spaceship, we have a finite amount of supplies with an intelligent operating system called nature, which keeps everything replenished as long as we all respect and participate wisely. In this podcast, I'm in conversation with humans involved in regenerating life, shifting consciousness and reimagining how we can live more beautifully and peacefully. I talk with artists, writers, activists, designers, adventurers, healers, farmers, creative mavericks, and more. Their stories invite us to participate in the co-creation of life-sustaining cultures in service to life, becoming crew on Spaceship Earth. Greetings, Earthling. Dan here. Thank you kindly for tuning in to the Spaceship Earth podcast. We're back. It's been a while. We've been composting of sorts. To be honest, I ran out of words end of last summer. Needed a break. Time in the woods. And then, like so many, became incredibly overwhelmed by the horrific suffering and violence happening in Gaza and Israel, and over the months, the yet deeper revealing of the systemised oppression of modern dominator culture and the general falling apart of things. So I've been thinking a bit about the future of the podcast. This is its 6th year. So I've been thinking, what's the point of it in these unravelling times? Who should I be speaking with? What should I be speaking to? I mean, these are not ordinary times we find ourselves in. Am I doing it with the right intention? What are the conversations that I'm wanting to invest in? Because the reality is the podcast takes a lot of time and cost to create and publish. And then how does this all fit into my own little existence on Spaceship Earth? What am I serving? So, following much time in the woods, communing with trees, in the waves of our ocean, and calling on intelligence and guidance from my ancestors and this more than human world, this is the start of a new season of recordings, some new formats and experiments. And also, the big news is the podcast has moved to Substack. Now, Substack is where I've been writing for quite a few years and where we offer up a newsletter and other musings from the Becoming crew. Now, that doesn't change how you listen to this. The podcast will remain free. Most of the writing will also remain free. But I definitely need to find ways to support all of this work in this monetary paradigm we live in right now. I just released a short episode speaking to this move to Substack in more detail, why we're doing it, what we're asking of listeners. So have a listen to that if you want to know more. There's also a post on Substack about it. It currently takes hundreds of pounds every month to put these out, and no money comes my way at all. There is a small crew who are paid micro fees right now to make this happen. So for about the cost of one British pint of beer a month or a couple of takeaway coffees, you can help support the creation of these episodes and our writing, which in humble ways are contributing to new ways of becoming on this earth, ways of being that are helping to bring us together and to cultivate life-sustaining cultures. So if you'd like to contribute in any way you can, get on over to Substack. We're at becomingcrew.substack.com. Subscribe to us. That way you'll get every new podcast episode straight to your email inbox. You'll get writing from me and my fellow guys and other community goodness. Please, if you can, support us in any way that you can afford. We'd massively appreciate it. So, this conversation is the first episode kicking off the new year. It's a conversation with someone who I think personifies the story of becoming crew on Spaceship Earth in 2024. She's worked within the big system, in this case healthcare. Her focus now is on co-creating new forms of systems outside of the institutional ones. Systems that put people, communities, and places at the centre. She's pioneering selflessly, not for commercial gain, but with a genuine understanding that the future is going to be extremely challenging, and we cannot wait for systems to change from the top down. We have to participate in the co-creation of alternative ways of organising, building new forms of regenerative infrastructures. She works intentionally from the heart, putting care and connection at the core of what she's doing. And vitally, she sees nature, the more than human world, as central to how we evolve, learning to reconnect and to practice new relationships with the patterns of the living earth, for connection, for intelligence, guidance and well-being, as well as informing how we organise and design these new regenerative systems and infrastructures. Her name is Dr. Ros Watts. She's a clinical psychologist by trade, a mother and lover of the natural world. Her work as the clinical lead for Imperial College London's Psilocybin trials has made her one of the most prominent voices and minds in the field of psychedelic research. She has been named as one of the 50 most influential people in psychedelics, as well as one of the top women shaping the future of psychedelics. What sets Ros apart is her focus on integration, harm reduction and inclusion in the psychedelic space, and the tools and structures that she's been building to cultivate connectedness after psychedelic experiences, finding inspiration for their design from nature. Through all her work, Ros's main learning has been that safe and effective use of psychedelics requires substantial integration support. And through this, she co-founded the UK's first psychedelic integration group. In 2022, launched ACER, which stands for Accept, Connect, Embody, Restore. ACER Integration. It's a global online integration community where participants follow a year-long process together in community to connect more deeply to self, others, and the natural world. Ros has shared her story widely on other podcasts, so we spent this hour exploring this moment in time, the beginning of 2024, and the context we find ourselves in, her learnings, the direction of her work this year, with particular focus on healing in communities, practice-driven change, and our relationship with trees. So let's cut to it. This is the Spaceship Earth podcast in conversation with Dr. Ros Watts. Enjoy.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
Ros, welcome to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. I'm glad there's a tree. I can see trees behind you because we had attempted, didn't we, to try and do this in the woods several times.
Yes, we did. And circumstances prevented it. But yeah, indeed. I'm staying at my friend's house who has some beautiful trees in his garden, and I'm pretending I'm in the woods even though I'm in London.
Well, just seeing the trees is just,
Yes.
I don't know, it just shifts things, doesn't it? So
She does, yeah.
yeah. So you're in London, and how are you showing up today? Like right now, what's going on for you?
So I'm sitting on the floor with my back against this kind of window. So I feel like I'm kind of like half in the garden in spirit. I've got my cup of coffee here. The floor is quite warm, and I am in the middle of doing loads of things I really enjoy at the moment. So I'm kind of, on the coffee, on the laptop, busy, but really feeling that sense of, yes, the direction, the new flows are all feeling really, really good. So I'm actually, I'm in the zone today, which isn't always the case. But I'm in the kind of coffee flow.
Nice. I woke up. It was a full moon. It was the wolf moon last night.
Yes.
And it was and we kicked off one of our learning journeys last night. Something we do called, it's a 5-week thing. It's called community solo, and it builds up to a nature solo that people do, where they live. But we do sort of 3 weeks online prepping, and it was the wolf moon that kicked us off. We had this sort of candlelit Zoom sort of space, and then I walked out and I could see the glow of the moon, but it was very cloudy. But I woke up this morning at 6 and I went into the kitchen and I could the moon was doing its doing its descent down towards the sort of west, and it was so bright and it was beams coming in at 6. So I just sat there and bathing in the moonbeams and feeling very grateful for that, just because, it's, I think, and I guess that's where I wanted to start, because I'd be probably like all of us have been last year, I think towards the end of last year, feeling so much overwhelm, which can often be the case for me anyway at the end of the year. But obviously with everything that just was happening on our planet, and how, all the intensity, particularly everything going on in Gaza and Israel, and towards the end of last year, I personally was just in I think I sort of crawled out of the year, and I started this year, I think, feeling quite mindful of how I respond to these times, because personally I could see myself, and I find it very, very I still find it really confusing how to navigate where different people are at, and you know what I mean? I don't know. It just felt like we're at this kind of, everything is a sort of tinderbox, and people are so on edge about, what to speak to, what not to speak to. And I don't know. So I was just interesting as this year starts, I was thinking about this question, actually just kickstarting the podcast this year again, just trying to sense how people are, how are they sensing the bit of Spaceship Earth that they're exploring, or the networks that they're in? What would you say what's the sort of vibe that you're sensing at the start of this year? Start with the big one.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I really shared that sense of overwhelm as well at the end of last year too. I think for New Year's Eve, my friends and I just sat by the fire. We kind of, we had some plans of kind of, let's go and celebrate. And then we're like, no, this is a year for sitting and hugging and crying and processing. And I think for January, this cycle, the 12 tree cycle that we follow in ASA, which is this community platform that I work within, that I founded. And we have this framework of 12 trees, a different tree for every month of the year. So that really shapes my sense of every month. And we go round in a kind of spiral. We go round to the same tree every time. So the silver birch is a tree for January, and it's all about the way the silver birch bark peels off, it exfoliates off and reveals this soft, silvery, beautiful kind of tabula rasa. So it's a lot about letting go of the old stories. And so I have been feeling the kind of spaciousness that comes from the silver birch month, which is a lot around I mean, it's kind of cliched now, but just being in the present moment, really just being with the stillness and being with now, and finding from that place of peacefulness. I think it is, if you think about a snow-covered forest and you imagine lots of silver birch trees and they're all covered in snow and it's a crisp, bright day, the embodied feeling it gives is of peacefulness. The way snow makes everything kind of silent.
Yeah.
And you imagine this forest covered in snow and there's no one around. So there's everything that's happening in the world, the fires, the wars, and there is this peaceful place. And so when you find that peaceful place within, and then you find what you want your new story to be about, and it's almost like you just imagine kind of one or two words, and it's intention setting for the rest of the year, but in a more embodied way. And I realized actually on New Year's Eve, as we were about to enter into the silver birch month, I suddenly realized that what was needed for ASA and for me was to organize a fundraiser event where we share some of our sharing circles and get some amazing speakers to do a fundraising event for Doctors Without Borders and for people to speak about what's happening in Gaza and Israel, because I completely agree. It's so hard to know how to respond. Social media posts often just end up in polarization and fighting. And how do we feel like we're contributing something that is meaningful? So yeah, from my kind of blank slate of letting go of last year and saying, what's the one thing that I need to do now? We're organizing a fundraiser event. So that's what I'm focusing on. And that feels really, that's the vibe, which is people coming together. I've asked about 30 therapists, are you willing to hold a sharing circle for this event for free? And every single one of them has said yes. So it's this feeling of, wow, okay, we're here, we're doing this together.
Is this the thing I saw you with Gabor Mate? Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah. And he's
when
such an elder. So that's on Valentine's Day. So it might be around the same time this podcast comes out, actually. I'm not sure when this will be, but yeah, it'll be on Valentine's Day. And it's for Valentine's Day. It's called Love and Grief in the Shadow of War. And it's how do we speak to the grief we hold at this time and also feel our love, because they're two sides of the same coin. Our grief teaches us what we most love and what we most care about.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's beautiful. And yeah, and I think, because I think this is, and this will, I guess we'll dig into this because it all feels very entangled with the work that you do. And interesting, actually, increasingly, I'm finding it through my own work, my own explorations, this, how do we sort of show up in the moment in a way that isn't perpetuating the ways of responding that have got us into these things, exactly. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Because there was I had an opportunity last year to go to Plum Village in France for a week, and with an amazing sort of group of climate activists and stay, with the monastics for a week and sort of practice and listen and learn. But there was something, one of them, and there's lots of stuff. They're probably for me, like the smartest people on the planet right now in terms of how they speak about things. But they said something, or someone said, there's no way to peace. Peace is the way. And it's this kind of like, this idea of, I think they call it present-centered action. It's what we're doing now in the moment that is going to lead us to a different type of future. I know that again. I'm taking a lot and putting it, but do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, fully resonate. And it's so true. And when people say it, it's easy for it to feel it's easy to fight against it. Say, oh, well, if it's all just about us being peaceful, nothing changes if we don't fight. But it's the way it's the kind of peaceful heart resonance, solidarity of huge numbers of people coming together to stand in peace for what is important. That will bring change, I think. So yes, I fully agree. We can't use the same the kind of the rageful, smashing kind of energy of, so often activism has that energy of, you know, and I'm so prone to that. So the silver birch tree with its peaceful, snowy covered ground and those trees is as far away from my nature as you can get. I'm by nature really fiery, really impulsive, really impatient. Give me a protest, I'll be at the front with a placard shouting, always have been that way. And I know from my own life that my way is not the way at all. And I'm trying to learn how to be more like a tree and be deep rooted, standing for what I believe in, generative, bearing fruit, rather than like a match, you know, that sets fire to a forest.
Wow. I love that. We'll dig into the trees in a bit. So listen, I because you can see I can go off on one, and I'm just conscious that, you know, for listeners that don't know you and your work, it would be really helpful. And I know again you've spoke quite extensively about your journeys on plenty of podcasts, but to give us just a sense of the journey of your work, because you're originally a clinical psychologist, right? And have ended up moving into psychedelic therapies and research with psilocybin and now all this amazing integration work, which is obviously what we want to dig into. But would you just give folks a little bit of a sort of a backstory, the threads that led to where you are?
Yes, absolutely. So I trained as a clinical psychologist, as you said, and my life was kind of ticking along in a kind of quite, I suppose, conventional way. And although, as I said, being quite fiery by nature always, was in, you know, kind of walking down quite a steady path, I would say. And then suddenly everything changed through a series of kind of funny synchronicities, chance meetings. And I found myself, it felt like my life suddenly took a very strong left turn. And I found myself working as a guide on a psilocybin for depression trial. And that was actually when I was on maternity leave. So the first part of the curveball was actually, kind of leaving a relationship, starting a new relationship, having a baby, living on a houseboat, you know, all quite quickly. And then finding myself in maternity leave, having this time to volunteer, because in the NHS where I'd been working up until then, you know, you're so busy, you don't have any time for extracurricular activities. But I'd been reading a lot about psilocybin for depression because my best friend had depression and she'd tried ayahuasca and it had really helped her. So whilst I was on my maternity leave, I had time to Google psychedelic therapy for depression, and I could see that it was looking quite promising. And I saw that there was a study happening down the road. So on my maternity leave, I went and volunteered at Imperial College as a guide. So I sat in people's psilocybin sessions, 6 hours. They would have their playlist and they'd have me and a psychiatrist or another psychologist sitting with them. And then they would go through after that their learnings and their insights. And people had really quite profound, insights and transformation from these one-off psilocybin experiences. So then I fully switched over. I left my job in the NHS and I was working at Imperial College, and we did another research trial, which was a randomized control trial comparing antidepressants and psilocybin. And I was fully into the kind of, the psychedelic clinical trial research world for quite a long time. And I wrote about connectedness. So the thread through it all really is that for me, I could see that where I'd been working as a clinical psychologist in Tower Hamlets in London, it's a very deprived area. But not just there, in fact, all the areas I'd worked in, there was this kind of real strong feeling of cultural disconnectedness, that people were coming with anxiety or depression or whatever it was, or addiction. And actually, we're all living in these toxic cultures, which was becoming more and more obvious that people just didn't have community connection. So I'd started to see that there was a kind of, that treating individuals for these issues was really missing the point. This was a cultural collective malaise. So I could see that we were kind of using sticking plasters to give people talking therapy. So when I found psychedelics, I was more hopeful that this could be more of a collective response, because psychedelics are, as well as being used in clinics kind of one-on-one, they have this much more kind of cultural, that they're more kind of revolutionary in their scope, I would say.
What was What was just on that, just on that idea of, being in as a clinical psychologist and working with all of this kind of, accelerating mental health, challenge coming from everywhere. And obviously the pressures of being in that health system as it is, and then all of this incoming. What was it that was, obviously there's lots that sits under these therapies, but what was the main thing that was like when you looked at what you were doing and how you were trying to treat through the conventional system, and then through the work that you were exposed to through the psilocybin therapies and psychedelic therapies? How could you, just someone that's going, well, why was you so excited by, could you just give us a sort of like the headlines?
So the first headline would be the depth of the connection between the participant and the therapists. So if you're seeing somebody for talking therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, in the National Health Service, you might see them 6 times or 12 times or, something like that, maybe longer. And you see them for an hour each time. And you're there in your professional capacity with your badge on as a, proper doctor person. And they're there in their kind of role as patient person that needs help. And you have your frameworks of your manuals and your CBT models for this and that can be really helpful for people, but you have your very specific kind of medicalized framework of how you can, as an expert, help this person stop doing the things wrong that they're doing that are stopping them from being happy. So think differently, behave differently, and you'll feel differently. And it felt like there wasn't much room for connection between you and the person. And that was almost held as a defense, because you're so overwhelmed if you're seeing 8 people a day. You almost don't have, and you do still care about your patients and, you do still connect with people, but there isn't much space for it. And you almost don't have the capacity to, in that context, when you don't have much hopeful support to offer, because you don't have very many strong tools. You're just kind of, you've got your little manual there. There isn't much hope in the relationship. And so the person feels stuck and you feel stuck. So it all feels a bit stuck and there's not much room for hope or connection. In the psychedelic therapy room, people are trying something new, so there's more hope, but you're spending so much more time with them. You're spending 6 hours with them and also lots of preparation time before and after. You connect as human beings. It's a soul connection. You feel that you are witnessing them and that you have time and space to witness them. And you're sitting in a room with music playing. Sometimes you hold their hand, and it's soul to soul as opposed to kind of clipboard to clipboard. It's a very different connection.
And I guess in terms of what you see coming through that, in terms of impact on, I guess I like those clinical terms, patients, because even that's, I've struggled with that a little bit.
Know.
But you know what I mean?
Yes. In terms of their journeys, so in a kind of 1 hour CBT session, you're kind of looking at their negative thought patterns and going through how they can make changes to their daily routines and relationships. And in a psychedelic session, it's, 6 hours, and they are completely guided by their own inner healing intelligence, is what we call it. So it's not coming from you, it's coming from them. And it's embodied, it's raw. They might be crying at times. They're having these amazing ideas and insights. Sometimes it's absolutely terrifying as well and very challenging. But overall, they are feeling we are such a cognitive society. We have such a rational, materialist.
Stuck in our heads. And in the psychedelic, and it's really hard to break through that. And when all of our cognitive models just keep us stuck in this loop of going in our heads, this loop round and round. But in the session, seeing people crying and laughing, and then the rage that they would, sometimes take out on a pillow, but it's real emotion that's been trapped in their bodies because they've been stuck in their heads. And the emotional expression, the emotional catharsis, the emotional roller coaster that they're on felt like, now things are really shifting. So it was a combination of the connection that is felt between the people, the relationality that is needed to hold that work, and the connection they felt to their own emotions
not just their story, not just the same story they've told to 5 different therapists about what happened when this happened or that happened, but actually the visceral, embodied expression of the emotions that have arisen because of those experiences and haven't had a chance to be fully felt.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I guess, I mean, I asked this, I mean, I've experienced both of those. Both of those. I've gone through conventional therapies for mental health, depression, and I've had psychedelic therapy. So I've experienced that as well. So I when I listen to you, it just echoes everything that I experienced. And again, there's places for all of it. But what I experience anyway is I find with talking therapy anyway is there's just doors that I can keep closed, just avoid. I can see as many specialists and therapists, and they're all brilliant, but I can still keep doors shut, whereas when I experienced psychedelic therapy, of course, those doors opened. That's how I sort of, that's how I experienced it. And I can still pull on that. I can still pull on that experience and that insight now. And that was 5 years ago. And we'll obviously talk about your integration work, because I think it wasn't, I've done a lot of integration, and I still, it's an ongoing thing, right? It's an ongoing thing. But I guess for you, just the other thing is just, if we step back and look at it as we've got these health systems and we're spending all this money and we're looking at people who are struggling, more and more people are struggling everywhere. I imagine that the frustration also that you must experience with sort of like being able to see something that has so much potential, and yet, as I understand it, particularly in this country, is still incredibly difficult to sort of, for it to be, is that right? For it to really be, for it to be accessible.
Well, yes. And also thinking, like, zooming out more, I'm really thinking about what you speak to on this podcast. I think there's other considerations too. So I'm just trying to think how I can say this succinctly. So at the moment, so when psychedelics first came in like the 60s, they came in, and the attempt of psychedelics, plant medicines, to come into the Western culture was unsuccessful. And that was largely because they were too radical. Mm-hmm. They were too outside the main paradigm, and they were seen as too threatening, and so they were shut down. So then we have another go in the kind of 2000s, and, for the last couple of decades, since about 2007, there's been Western research on psychedelics, and this time it's coming from within the medical model. That's where it's kind of leading the next kind of attempt of psychedelics to re-enter our culture. And now the risk, I think, is not so much that they're going to be so revolutionary that they're going to be shut down, but that they're going to be so unrevolutionary that they're not going to shift the status quo enough. So given the context of the time that we're in, and I was just reading the amazing book, I don't know if you've read it, by Alnor Ladder and Lynn Murphy, Post-Capitalist Philanthropy.
I saw him talking about it at the local Futures where I saw you in Bristol. Yes. And it just, I mean, I know Alnor's work, but this particular book was just mind-boggling. Oh. Anyway, sorry.
I'm so glad that you've got it there. And I kind of felt that you probably would have. And it's definitely, the mycelial connections definitely at the moment speaking loudly about Alnor's book and Lynn's book. But yes, I was reading in that, and it was saying, I'm
going to try and ask him to come on the pod, actually.
Oh, you must. Oh yeah. I spoke to him the other day, and it was wonderful talking to him. And they write that, the planet may be uninhabitable by 2070. So right. with that kind of phrase, so that's kind of, I've almost got that etched on everything I look at is kind of through that lens. Whether or not it's completely accurate, it's helpful for me. It's very simple, and it guides everything I do. So when I think about psychedelic therapy, yes, psychedelic therapy can be helpful in the context I described, in a hospital room with a therapist, helping somebody with depression or with addiction, or, to come through. And that's really important. And I fight for that. I really, really believe in that. And also it's an individualistic model, and it fits very well into our paradigm, and it fits well into the capitalist system. And we have, for-profit companies, investing in psychedelics, and sometimes some companies are looking at taking away the psychedelic effects and just using them like antidepressant medications. So they'll fit neatly into the big pharma model. Yeah. And so I feel like you talked about, do I have a kind of frustration at the kind of the pace and there's so much need? And yes, I do feel a frustration and a sense of, we need to build healing infrastructure. But the healing infrastructure I'm imagining doesn't look like
it's not within the existing system.
No. The infrastructure I'm imagining is networks, mycelial networks of people in local communities that are linked together through, kind of more centralized pods of disseminating training and information. And these local mycelial tendrils of people offering places of care to each other, because we live in a culture where the organizing principle is profit and has been for so long.
Yeah.
We need to be in a society where the organizing principle is care, and especially given the time that we're going through now. So I imagine psychedelics being part of the creation of local infrastructure that is outside of the NHS. And I think they can be part of that system. They can be part of helping create that system, and they can be the system by which those healing methods are disseminated to people.
We live on a life-giving rock called Earth, hurtling through space. How bonkers is that? You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast.
If you'd like to support the running of the Spaceship Earth podcast, head over to our Substack and sign up. You'll get every episode straight to your inbox, weekly writing, plus other crew offerings. We're grateful for whatever you can give. Join us at becomingcrew.substack.com. Yeah, this is brilliant. There's so much coming up as you're speaking. First of all, it's making me think, like, the therapy I had was in Holland, and it was in community. So there's 20 of us, and there was obviously there was weeks of prepping and, one-on-one support to figure out if we were ready for this thing. But the experience was with 20 people, for 3 days. And I would say that, a big chunk of my medicine that I received through that came from being in community. And then it comes back to what you're talking about. Because I think, I think this is right, isn't it? But the word heal and the word whole they're linked etymologically, so there's a link. So the idea is that, healing in community, right? Rather than, or as part of community in relation to others, human, more than human. I think that's kind of I think that's kind of baked into our sort of DNA, as kind of how we evolved for the most of the time on this earth would be, our healing would be in relationship with others. It wouldn't be in our heads on our own. That's kind of, Does that, so there's all of that. And then I guess the other question I'd love to speak to you about is, because your research has been in psilocybin, right, particularly. Mm-hmm. And, again, I might not be correct here, but my understanding is that psilocybin, is obviously the active ingredient in certain mushrooms. But those mushrooms have been here longer than we've been here. So and we've made a species illegal, which I just can't compute that, which is something we had a relationship. We may well have even evolved in relationship with humans. And so yeah, there's lots of stuff that's coming up for me. But your idea of your vision of in community, we talk a lot about crews, right? Of like, how do we step into service and begin to go in these times? So there's all this capital that's sitting or being deployed into sort of crazy things. And we need to start deploying that into helping places, people, communities to build these alternative reality systems, infrastructures that you speak of that are, led by people, are on the ground, are shaped by places. So I find this so fascinating what you're exploring. And I think that healing and dealing with this, even just dealing with the letting go of these big stories that we're going to have to, increasingly get our heads around, the role for this work just feels profoundly important to me.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we can find through these very difficult, dark times we're in, so much uncertainty, it's kind of like a death rebirth time. we can find so much joy as our material comforts become a distant memory, as we no longer import whatever luxury item from the other side of the world, and we start to be providing food in our local communities, and as we start having to make compromises and sacrifices, that we will find much deeper happiness than we have with all of our incredible comfort and ridiculous amounts, like supermarket shelves packed with every color under the sun, of every variety, of every, and yet people walking around the supermarket like miserable zombies. And we will find that when we are sitting around a fire, sharing whatever lentils or quinoa we may have been growing with, maybe I'm being a bit kind of extreme, but we will feel so much happier because we are impoverished right now. And I think we're moving into times of communal luxury. So like practical and material scarcity and connective luxury, because we're going to have to reconnect with each other. So in that context, I think we can find such joy in reconnecting with tribe, with community. And I think, we were both at that same conference in Bristol, the Local Futures one. It was so inspiring. It was probably my best moment of last year, being there amongst those people and hearing about community initiatives and realizing the power of local groups of people coming together. And psychedelics can be an incredibly helpful tool for supporting those local communities. And they are so powerful and they need so much care. And so I think my biggest inspiration in terms of thinking about how we can start to actually organize these kind of local communities around psychedelic infrastructure is thinking about the way nature grows, and it's slow, it's interconnected, it's cyclical, and it's in balance, and how we can, rather than, there's a real gold rush in the psychedelics world of people making, let's start a clinic, right, well, we needed this, we need a doctor, we need this, right, let's find them all in the next 5 minutes, let's get a few £1 million of investment, right, let's go. And they all fail. And what we need to do is say, okay, I'm going to find one other person in my local area that I have the same values and the same idea. We might start a monthly club where we chat about it. Let's see if we can very slowly, step by step, get the deep roots of an interconnected local hub that starts to, as at the pace of trust and the pace of genuine strength of those root connections, start to see what we can offer our local community, but not this kind of fast-paced gold rush thing that is so common in neoliberal culture.
Yeah, it's I mean, what you're speaking to, I'm experiencing in that, that binary tension everywhere. It's sort of, there's all these beautiful things that everywhere that are sort of emerging, whether it, new ways of, and often old ways, but ways of meeting so many of these bigger kind of systemic challenges. And we see people everywhere, but obviously there's two things at play. There's partly like all of us are still sort of plugged into this kind of monetary paradigm where it's extremely difficult to sort of birth new things and exist within the machine, which is so, you sort of wake up and walk out the door and it feels like sort of money's sucked out of you. And so there's both that tension of how to, and then so how do you design something which is using a completely different logic than the industrial capitalist logic, and sort of keep ourselves, sustained while this whole, I don't even know what it is. It's definitely not a transition. I mean, it's a sort of unraveling, collapsing, sort of emerging sort of. So there's that challenge. And then, as you say, and then there is the challenge of the sort of beautiful kind of ideas, projects, things that really can help us tackle different problems, bring us together. But there's still this kind of monetization that's sitting under things. You see it a lot, I guess, we see it everywhere. So I guess it's just the thing, isn't it? It's just it's messy. It's really messy trying to, there's no sort of direct path here. It's experimental and it's kind of, so are you seeing this vision that you have? And I know there's kind of legalities and all that kind of stuff. But this idea, because for some, they'll go, wow, that's quite radical. The idea of, you know, a community, you know, I'm imagining where I live, I'm imagining, you know, a space somewhere, and there's some folks, you know, who've trained up to sort of hold and guide, and there's kind of like, I don't know, you know, maybe there's kind of, you know, mushrooms being grown. I'm sort of envisioning this thing, you know, and sort of like, you know, we see people in our community who we know are really struggling, and I mean, I can see it, but I've experienced it, but it's quite. For some, they'll think, oh, well, you know, how's that going to work? And is it happening? I'm sure it is. But can you shed light on where this is? I mean, in other countries, is this how it's emerging?
Well, there've been underground practitioners of psychedelic therapy for a very long time.
Forever.
Yeah, there have always been, and some really good ones, and obviously lots of variety. You know, and the thing is, they're quite isolated because they can't talk about their work publicly. They're like, you know, they're vulnerable to arrest. And also they're kind of often, I think there are some networks of underground therapists, but they, by their very nature, they're underground. They have to be.
Yeah.
So the reason I started ASA, well, there were many reasons. It's a kind of online integration community for people that have had psychedelic experiences, but it was actually also for this, but to get to where I'm talking about in a kind of like 30-stage plan over the course of 10 years. So stage 1 is having a global community of people that come together who are, many of them are therapists, or how would I describe the people in our community? They're people that want to be in service. They're very grounded. They love nature because it's all about nature and psychedelics and connectedness. And we get to know them very well. They get to know each other over a long period of time, over a whole year. And then when they go into year 2, we then provide people with some of the tools for creating community and creating groups. And they can go into their local communities and offer those for free to very, very slowly start creating a little hub wherever they live. And that hub has got nothing to do with psychedelics. So the tools that we use at this stage while psychedelics are illegal, we do guided imagery journeys that are all about feeling that sense of connection. They're quite shamanic. Some of them go quite deep. And we also, you know, there's other things like breath work where you can get to a kind of altered state of consciousness too. But it's all about finding the right people, connecting the right people together, giving them a sense of support and community, and then very, very, very slowly starting to create the mycelial infrastructure before any psychedelics are given. And then in maybe 10 years, my dream is that all over the world, there would be people that have been part of this ASA community that then become the people in their local communities who are, when psychedelics become legal, are able to offer them in a way that they're part of a framework, they're part of a family, and we all keep each other accountable and protected and safe. And the main thing about the ASA community is that I would say the people that we have lots and lots of, it just seems to attract people who are really grounded and really wanting to do the work that is necessary in this time, rather than coming from a place of, I want to be a psychedelic, you know, goddess or god.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of like cool stuff attached to it.
There's a lot of that, yeah.
There's a lot of that. So I think for me, the most important thing, it's not so much the how or the what, it's the who. It's the who. Like, we all have different motivations. We all have different places we're at with our shadow work. We all have different ways of interacting with the system that we're in. And I've seen this time and time again, when people's integrity gets tested, and whether it's about the kind of like, how much are we actually supporting the neoliberal paradigm because it suits us? Do we say we vote one way and then we actually vote another way because it helps our bank account? Like, how is that kind of slightly cliched phrase about showing up? How are we actually, like, when no one is watching, fighting for a different world versus doing what's right for us as individuals? So I think what we need to do is create resources and support for people who are genuinely willing to sacrifice their own egoic needs for the good of the collective, support those people in doing their thing and helping them find each other, becoming a kind of, like a worldwide movement of people who are saying, you know, we do need to build this new world and we'll do whatever we need to do, whether it's make the tea or, you know, you talk about the crew. It's like we need to become that crew. And so that's really, it's finding the crew that I think we need to do right now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's I think it was listening. I think it was Margaret Wheatley recently, but I think she said something like, again, saying that, you know, we've gone part, for whatever you, in her view, as in many people's views, it's too late for the stuff is happening. The stuff coming down the line is going to is so beyond what most people still can imagine. So she talked about making a different kind of difference. This idea that you might have thought, you might be thinking, oh, how do I change the world? How do I do, what do I do with my business? And it's like more like, now what can you do now that's uniquely yours to do in the communities that you're in? Whether that is, your communities of work, your communities of place, whatever it might be, that is about exactly that. It's about, and she talked about this sort of, I think it was about like focusing on the human spirit. How do we grow the human spirit? That's what we want to be growing, and it's really interesting just attached to that, what you're saying about, because I know obviously the work this integration work, and we'll get on to particularly I'd love to chat more about the 12 trees, but this idea of helping people in community to come through this kind of, they've had this experience, but then how you work within community of both humans and more than humans to really kind of integrate yourself back in and practice into a kind of different way, right? A different way of being and relating, so that you don't end up stuck in the sick culture, and repeating. And this idea that, actually psychedelics are they're an amazing, but they're one part of that. And, for example, last night we had one of our learning journeys, as I mentioned, and Eva, my fellow guide, is amazing. She took us through a half an hour of kind of exploring our ancestral threads. And it was a group of strangers meeting for the first time. And it was so profound for everybody, and, everyone's, I think it was bit of ginger tea being drunk, but that was it. And it was so profound. And now everyone's working with something that came through that experience, right? So there's no psychedelics, nothing. And it's what you speak to. We can find ways to connect to something deeper. I was calling it ancestral intelligence. That's the real AI. None of this artificial stuff. Ooh. But there's so much for us there's so many thresholds for us to sort of cross, and explore different types of relationships that have always been there. We just haven't been, the culture has made them invisible, the dominant culture. So yeah, I mean, maybe we could speak more about the work, why you then, what's going on with the 12 trees. 12, interesting, I used to manage a guy called 12 Tree, a music artist back in the 90s. I don't know why, it's just come up.
Shall we swing a little bit?
Good name. Yeah. No, and I love that. That's so interesting about the power of that first meeting, and that everybody could relate to it. And I was just thinking when you were saying that, how incredible this is, that this is happening. So, and it's happening so quickly. And in a way, it's the thing that gives me the most hope. This is just happening. This is what the shifts, the consciousness shifts are happening in spite of us, beyond us, through us. We do what we do, but it's happening. And the very fact that in 2024, a group of people are getting together and they are trusting a process about tapping into the wisdom of their ancestors. Even a few years ago, you would have got so many raised eyebrows if you'd said that.
Yeah.
And now people are rolling with it and they're experiencing it. And it's the same. There is this, this massive awakening happening, and there is a huge coming back to what we are. And there's a huge understanding of, it feels awful in the world right now, but this kind of horrific system that we've been living in has been horrific for a very long time. But, we went to school and got taught that it was good, and we thought it was fine and democratic, and we were the good ones. And we're waking up now to the violence of the Western world. And it was violent. It's been for a very, very long time. So there is this massive, huge change happening. And so, I think, so
it's about trusting, isn't it? I think this thing we've talked about a lot, and I think that's maybe where the psychedelics have always been helpful to open people up to sort of to to be able to sort of sense and feel and experience in different ways that the sort of head logic, is so limiting, so restrictive. And so then with all of these, as I say, exactly that way, we can start to explore these different ways of knowing ourselves, of each other, through all these different approaches. Many of them don't involve having to take anything, they're sort of, but there is something when we drop into our hearts, or when we drop into our bodies, when we practice, relating to the earth around us and building relationships with other beings or spirits or, ancestors or whatever, there's a whole load of possibility that sort of starts appearing that doesn't, at least my experience, that just doesn't exist in the modern culture. So I find the modern culture, my head just blows apart. I've been running out of even ways to talk to it or be, you know what I mean? How to show up and be, inverted commas, normal, because it just doesn't make any sense to me. It feels so stuck in my head.
It's just like the insanity. I mean, sometimes I have to confess, like a good Netflix binge is just what I need. But most of the time, I just can't believe that at the time of like this need and huge awakening, there's little boxes everywhere with like little screens and everyone watching, like,
right.
Everybody like completely absorbed in things that are real, like, and caring about like characters in programs as if they're real people, whilst actual real people, like it is, the modern culture is so abnormal and weird. Like, I think we shouldn't try and be part of it anymore.
No, but it's so pervasive. And that's why I think like these, and again, and not in a, I don't speak to it in a sort of I'm not trying to blame people for being stuck in it, because I know how pervasive it is. It's just
totally.
But I guess what I'm interested in and what you're experiencing through the work, I think, is this idea that when we allow ourselves to sort of start to practice knowing the world and ourselves differently, or in other ways, because I think that's the thing. There are many ways to sort of relate and navigate life that I feel, at least my senses are sort of, because they're not in the way that we've all been programmed through education, institutional sort of life, that we can't access that. So for me, a part of this is, how do you help people access and practice new ways of experiencing?
Yes, and actually that is, to come back to your question about the 12 trees, that is exactly what it's about. So, I mean, if you think about a tree, and it's a bit of a cliche as well, like the kind of tree hugger hippies as well, but, for good reason, because trees are such a tree grows from a tiny little seed, and it becomes this strong, incredible, rooted being that connects to other beings underground. They share water and resources and minerals and information. They become these villages, these communities, and they turn mud into flowers. They grow in the mud and they grow over the rocks, and no matter what the kind of ruggedy, rocky, toxic soil they're on, they turn that into flowers and fruits and leaves, and they make the air breathable for us. I mean, the trees are magic, benevolent, beautiful beings that give us life, and they're everywhere. We all have trees nearby, and connecting to trees, I think, is one of the easiest portals for us in the modern world to go from our Netflix. And trust me, I said before my left turn happened, I mean, I was fully signed up to that. I didn't want anything different. I was happy. I thought I was pretty content. And in many ways, I've been much less content since, trying to find this other way, because it's like, it's less content, but more deeply connected. It doesn't always feel easy. Sometimes it feels very challenging. Before I was content and numbed. Now I'm often much more weepy and sometimes scared, but also connected. So yeah, the trees are a beautiful way in, because I don't know if I've ever met anyone that doesn't actually love trees. Like people from all different walks of life, all political parties, we all love trees. And when you hug a tree, you actually do it. You can feel the support that comes from that strong body. And, sitting under the shade of a tree, I think we all have trees that are favorite trees from our childhood. Maybe we like to climb them. And so they're a great way in. And we use lots of metaphors around the way trees work and forests work as well within ACER. So ACER stands for accept, connect, embody, restore. And the accept part is really symbolized by this idea that a tree has had to grow around many, many rocks, and its roots go down deep into the dark earth, and it's not light and it's not easy. And this is the feeling into where we've come from, our roots, all we've had to grow around. Those rocks are a metaphor for the traumatic experiences in our childhood that our roots had to grow around. And yet, the deeper the roots, the stronger the branches. The tree is a mirror image. So the branches are a mirror image of the roots. So the more messy and entangled and deep, the more traumas that we've had to go through. In a way, it makes us more wide ranging. And if we can get the support we need to turn all of that that we've been through into meaning, into growth, then we become a very strong tree. So the acceptance is about allowing our roots to be as they are, to allow the mud and the rocks to be as they are, and to feel the feelings that come from those shadowy places. And then the connect part is the mirror images, the branches, which is all that you have been through can become your mission. It's like people that have been through abuse often work within the field of supporting people that have been abused. Wounded healer analogy, everybody working, people working within healthcare services have been hurt themselves and want to provide help for other people. If you think about the great pioneers of peace, there are people that have been suffering themselves and oppressed themselves, and then they become pioneers of peace. So it's about using everything that you've been through to become somebody that can offer some healing medicine to your community from that place. So your branches, your wide branches, that's all about the connection to your values. Your branches grow towards the sun. They grow up, the mirror image of your roots, and they reach towards the light. They reach towards the other trees, and they become shelter for the birds. They become a place to sit. They become a place of safety for other people, for the whole ecosystem. So we in our neoliberal modernist culture have been fed this diet of what beauty means. And, we're given these examples of what we have to be like to be seen as beautiful. But when you go into a forest and you see a kind of perfect looking tree, you probably walk straight past it because it just looks quite boring. When you see an old, gnarly oak tree that is wizened, it had a branch knocked off in a storm, it was hit by lightning, it's got an owl nesting, it's got holes and crannies and scars, and it's a big, gnarly old tree. The older the better. That is the tree that we stop and we look at it and we say, that tree is so beautiful. And when you think about the elders in our community, people that have lived through real trauma and have found meaning, those are the people that we want to sit with at the feet of and say, tell me a story. They are the healers. So I think there's something around really allowing whatever we've been through to guide us and create the shape of our tree.
There are two stories on Spaceship Earth, a passenger story and a crew story. The passenger story is based on extraction, transaction and distraction, and it's leading us towards collapse. The crew story is based on connection, cooperation and participation. It leads towards regeneration.
You're listening to the Spaceship Earth podcast with my dad, Dan Burgess.
So beautiful. I mean, it's this, I listen to you and I think, because I see, I see sort of the older I get, I sort of, at least my experience of the world and those I meet is that everyone has some form of suffering, and suffering is a human condition. And it's not, we've been sort of, again, in the sort of Western, at least my experience, how I grew up, it's like you don't go there, or if you show suffering, you're somehow like this, It's weird. I mean, of course, it's changed massively. I'm just talking about the decades I grew up in. You know, the years that shaped me and my peers and those around us. Was, you know, you don't reveal that stuff, and it's vulnerable, and it's showing your vulnerability, but it's also accepting that. And again, what I've experienced personally is that when I can listen to other people's suffering, and they can hear my suffering and understand where it's coming from, and I can understand where they're coming from, then there's a whole load of sort of a space opens that you didn't think was possible before. You know, there's both an opening up, and then a sort of and then there's a sort of like a, you know, there's a kind of fertilizer sort of, you know, there's something that shifts, that allows that relationship to move to a different level. And but ultimately, again, there's very little, well, there hasn't been, you know, there's no spaces of practice. You know, you don't show up to work and go, I'm suffering, do you want to hear about it? You know, it was like, you know, so it's kind of like,
yeah.
But, you know, when we do, we recognize that, you know, that is also the thing, right? It's not, you know, life isn't this sort of everything's joyful and light. You know, there's you know, there's pain being human. There's a lot of it. And it's kind of like, that's my experience. It's part of it. You know, it's constantly, we're cycling, right, between joy and, you know, possibility and pain, and as life is, right? You know, there's endings and beginnings and cycles of that. So part of this, again, I guess it brings this area of practice. We call it practice-driven change. It's, you know, we've got to be practicing, relating together if we're really serious about the kinds of visions and shifts that I think a lot of people are talking about. It's not going to happen without this sort of, you know, becoming.
Absolutely. And so what I want to dedicate the rest of my life to is exactly what you're saying is needed and you needed and we all need, which is spaces where we can show each other our humanity in our suffering and our sadness and our grief and our anger and all of our fear, and not have it fixed, but just witnessed, and then to witness to that in other people, because that is the medicine. It's like you said when you went to your Netherlands psychedelic retreat, the medicine was the other people. Yeah. You don't need the psychedelics to have the medicine of connection with each other. Yeah. And I can't believe the poverty of our culture in that we don't have any spaces for this, that people, the waiting list for therapy is so long, and that's one-on-one. We don't normalize the experience of being human, and we're all suffering on our own. Rates of suicide are high. We're suffering on our own, thinking there's something wrong with us. Yet when you have the experience of sitting with other people and hearing them say just the contents of their, you know, it's such relief to everybody. And the vulnerability, I mean, Brené Brown's done a wonderful job in opening up this massive understanding of beauty and the connective power of vulnerability. But it takes a lot for people to actually do it. It started. Yeah. But that is, you know, having these, and actually that's what so when people join ASA and they do these tree journeys, and we have sharing circles, which are exactly around this, and people then become facilitators. So that's exactly the idea, that these communities will start with sharing circles, that people learn the skills of offering that to their community, and that then becomes a hub of connection wherever they live. Yeah, beautiful. No fixing, no judging, just listening. No. You know, it's like, so much power in you know, the quality of listening, such an underrated quality in modernity, I find, but there's so much power in listening and possibility in listening when we sort of listen to, you know, to each other, to ourselves. So listen, I'm conscious of time. We could probably talk for hours. If we'd gone into the woods, I guess this could have been about 3 hours. Yeah, because I would have kept showing you the different trees from the 12 trees, and then you would have had to get all the stories. Another time. We'll do it another time. So a couple of things. First of all, would you just, this is going to come out in February. Can you give us a little bit on the February tree? For whoever's listening, pleasure. You know, maybe a little invitation for listeners to go and find the tree of February. Yes. This is linked to a pagan calendar, is it not? Or is it a... Yes. So the Celtic tree calendar has different trees for different months, and that was the starting point. But then so I went for a walk with Philip Cargon, who was he used to be the chief druid in the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. and kind of said to him, I want to change. I want to do this 12 tree thing, a framework with a different tree for every month to help guide us through the year in community. But I want to change the trees around. Can I do that, or is it sacrilegious? And he said, no, the Celtic tree
remix. We love a remix.
Yeah. He said, it was invented. It's a story that was created. Somebody, decided on that. It was, I think that actually it was a poet it's not like an ancient system. It was it's a modern meditation on that. So he said, you go for it. So I changed it round because we have many people in the community from other places. So I didn't just want the native trees of the UK. So we have a redwood tree and we have many other trees. But for the tree of February, it's the rowan tree, which grow everywhere. It's my favorite tree. It's also called the mountain ash. And they grow often on the edge of mountains in very precarious rocky places. They're really resilient trees. And you can tell them because in winter they have bright orange berries. And every berry has the pentagram, the 5-pointed star on their base, which is a sacred symbol of protection. So in our community, rowan is the tree of love and grief. And that's because we come to the rowan tree in February, it's Valentine's Day. But the time when we meet the rowan tree in our community is when the last berry has fallen. So in the winter months, imagine it being snowy landscape, which it always would have been snowy before climate change, in this part of the world. And the rowan tree was called the wayfarer's tree because it was the last colour in the winter landscape. So they would plant rowan trees in important places so that people could navigate the landscape by the red berries. They'd be like a beacon of flame. And they would be full of berries until about kind of January. But when you meet the rowan tree in February, it's a symbol for the last bit of hope, the last bit of guidance, the last bit of colour in the landscape has gone. The berries feed the birds in the winter. It's like this, benevolent source of warmth in the cold. We meet the tree when the last berry have fallen and the branches are bare, the landscape is bare, there is no food, and it's a time of hopelessness and grief. So in our journey with the rowan, we meet the rowan tree, and it's hard to find the rowan tree, which is the rowan because it's got no berries. So it's that sense of loss, being lost, no way home, don't know where we are, complete hopelessness, no berries, no way of even finding this damn tree. It's this absolute moment of the worst moment, the darkest night the dark night of the soul. And then in our journey with the rowan, we imagine that we find the rowan somehow, and usually by scrabbling around in the dirt, and there's some composting rowan berries. And then you imagine going down through a tunnel down to a cave underneath the rowan tree. And in that cave, there's a tiny fire in the corner, and there is one glowing ember. All the fire has gone out apart from one ember. And you go down and you sit by the fire, and then there's a guide there. It's the rowan protector, who is the spirit of the rowan tree that sits there in the cave all year long and says to you, you need to blow on the ember to bring the fire back. Even though it's cold, the cave is dark, it's wintry, you have no hope, you're full of grief. Your grief teaches you about your love and what you most care about and want to protect. And that ember is a light with that last drop of care and hope that you have to bring something of love and connection back into this world. So you blow on the ember, you get it to light again, and it's a kind of symbol for bringing the warmth back into the cold, hopeless landscape.
Wow, that's beautiful. So let's keep our eyes peeled for the rowan.
Yes.
Next month, or this month,
yes.
by the time this comes out.
Yes.
I love that.
You'll have to scrabble around in the dirt to find composting rowan berries, but then the beautiful berries of the rowan will come alive in kind of like August, September next year in the autumn. That's when it's easier to find.
I love that. Scrabbling around the dirt, looking for sort of light. That's sort of metaphor of my life.
Yes. and mine, all of us.
Oh, so beautiful. So listen, we on the podcast, we explore this story of the Spaceship Earth and the idea that we're sort of stuck in this passenger story, modernity, this kind of story of sort of, I sort of paraphrase it, extraction transaction and distraction, and we're sort of being invited into this crew story, you know, to stepping into sort of service, connection, cooperation, participation, and regeneration, if we sort of work that way. And so, yeah, we talk about becoming crew, this kind of ongoing thing. And I guess, so I'm just curious, as we come to the close, what does that sort of story of becoming crew, what does it speak to you? What does it say to you at this time right now that we're in?
I love the way you describe distraction, extraction, and what was the other one? Distraction, extraction, transaction. Oh, brilliant. It just, sums it up so well. We're at a time of like really, really feeling that, of really feeling the way the system is rigged, the way it works, the violence of it that we've been implicated in, that it doesn't speak for us. So we are at a time of like great sadness as war rages, and we see that war rages in a way that is around the corruption of those, of the system that we're in. And we see the suffering of so many people and realize that it is because it is a consequence of the transaction and extraction and the distraction. And so we're all implicated and powerless. So it's a very, very hard time. So I'd say in terms of the crew, and I also love that analogy, it's a time when we're being called up to serve in a time when we might feel so sad and hopeless and defeated and guilty that we almost feel that there's nothing that we can do of any use. And so it's a time of kind of, you know, feeling like, gosh, do we just give up? But I think when you feel like the worst moments of desolation and hopelessness that we have when we're feeling alone, when we feel in our bodies the warming that happens when another human being says to us, would you like a cup of tea? Or shall we go on a walk? Or gives you a hug? Or someone is on the street and you give them a fiver and they say thank you, and you feel a little oxytocin flood go through your body. These little moments of warmth and of heart speaking, if you think about how much joy that gives you and that you can give that to other people, and how much greater joy it gives when you can give that to other people, then we know that the crew that we're calling now doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to have any major skills, just has to want to make things a little bit better. It comes back to what you were saying at the beginning about, you know, that it's in our being, it's how we do. There is no way to piece pieces the way, it's the way we are with each other. And that slowly, if we can start to have some sense that us being in community with each other and being nice to each other and creating safe spaces for each other, for sharing, for telling each other about our day, for crying and witnessing our tears, and not trying to give someone the tissues and, you know, but to actually let them cry, and to start creating those places where it's just our animal selves, our raw, soft bodies of our animal selves with our bellies exposed can kind of come out of that defensiveness of fighting and start taking care of each other. And it's those little acts of taking care that will build and grow. And from that, we can have a huge, huge crew that, even though we have different opinions and even though we've been indoctrinated in this system that's so violent, we can still keep coming back to that place of softness and that place of safety and that place of a gentle moment of connection. Keep coming back to say no to disconnection and yes to connection. And we can become so many in number that we realize that we stand together, and that actually the only us and them that really exists, if there is an us and them. And I think, you know, we are all one, but there's often this kind of divide and conquer mentality, especially at the moment. Yeah. But the only us and, but if there is an us and them, it's really only around a tiny, tiny number of people who, you know, probably unfortunately have a kind of psychopathic operating system. And it's a tiny, tiny, like maybe 0.00% of a tiny, tiny proportion of people versus everyone else with different political opinions, different parts of the world. And actually, we all want the same thing, which is to be free, safe and happy. And when we can start to create these little mycelial networks where people of different political persuasions can come together, that's when we realize that we are all one us, and that we are all on the same spaceship, and that we are all, just need to kind of be nice to each other in these times.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful, Ros. Thank you so much. I've loved chatting to you, and I think what you're doing, how you're doing it, is amazing, and continue to connect with the work that you're doing, because it feels very entangled with a lot of the threads I'm working with, but I just think the way you're doing it is so it's beautiful. So thank you for all that you do on Spaceship Earth.
Thank you, Dan. And I would say the same thing to you, that what you're doing and your work and your meetings and your candlelit full moon ancestral intelligence gathering, they sound amazing. And, doing this podcast and everything else. So thank you for what you're doing, I suppose.
Thank you, Ros. Go well.
You too.
So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Ros. If you're interested in her incredible work, head over to ASA Integration to find out more. We'll link in the show notes. Okay, so if you've enjoyed this episode, in the spirit of reciprocity and how life flourishes on Spaceship Earth, please consider offering something back. You might share this episode with a friend. You might share on your socials. You might leave us a review on your podcast provider. You might leave us a review on Instagram. You might send us a message about something that's impacted you, a voice note, an email, a DM. We love hearing from you, and we share your feedback with others. You could subscribe to our Substack, becomingcrew.substack.com. You could become a paying subscriber, diverting the price of a pint of beer or a couple of coffees a month to help us keep this podcast going. You might check out our learning journeys at becomingcrew.com. Anyway, you get the vibes. It's all about reciprocity. So we're going to play out with a track, keeping to the 12-tree theme that through Ros's work in the podcast I mentioned, sort of spontaneously came up, an artist called Robin 12-tree, who I used to manage for a short while back in the 90s. And I just thought it feels really appropriate. This is a track Robin released called Izzy Was a Groover. From 1999, released on Regal. I haven't seen Robin. I last saw Robin probably I think it was about 8 years ago. Bumped into him at Glastonbury at West Holt stage just before Hot Chip came on. Haven't seen him since. Anyway, this is an absolute belter. I can't actually believe it's nearly 25 years old. Trying to imagine when this landed 25 years ago. But Robin is an amazing musician, artist, producer, and enjoy. Look after yourself out there. Keep re-entangling with the web of life, and remember the crew story. We're all needed right now, especially those of us with a bit more privilege who've been flying business class on Spaceship Earth for probably too long. We all have something unique to offer these unravelling times, to serve our fellow humans and more than humans, and begin to participate in the messy, challenging, mysterious and joyful journey, co-creating life-sustaining cultures. Until next time, peace and out.
This podcast is created in service to life, for you. It takes time, funds and energy to make. If you'd like to contribute to the running costs, you can donate the price of a cuppa or a pint. Find the link on our website. This podcast wouldn't exist without the following crew: Charlie Shred, Audio Jedi; Seaman Home Burgess, Engine Room; Willow Burgess, Jingles.
Shall we swing a little bit?